We now come on to the second major method used within PRINCE2 Agile, and that is Kanban. And Kanban comes from the Japanese kan, which means card, and ban, which means signal. So a simple example of a Kanban that you'll all be familiar with is a checkbook reorder slip. So as you go through your checkbook using up checks, you'll eventually get to a slip that says you're nearly out of checks, reorder now. That's a visual signal that you need to make an action. So as the slide says, there's really two separate things. One is Kanban, which is the general concept of a visual signal, a card, a signal card, and the Kanban method. Now the Kanban method was created by David J. Anderson, who was one of the contributing authors of PRINCE2 Agile. It is within PRINCE2 Agile used in a slightly different way than traditionally used, in that it's used inside time boxes. So it does enable you, if you so wish, to use Scrum to create the time box, the sprint, and use Kanban as a tool and method within that. And of course, in your sprint retrospective, you will review, if you're using the Kanban method, you would be reviewing your use of the Kanban method in the sprint retrospective. So just to cover the points on the slide, you can see Kanban systems are visual management systems that limit the number of work items in circulation. It's important to recognise that Kanban systems are visual management systems which support the Agile idea and the Scrum theory of transparency. Kanban is focused on improving day-to-day decision making, enabling the deferral of commitment, and reducing lead times. And as I said, within PRINCE2, it is applicable in the project context to time boxes. So we'll now move on to discussing the Kanban method specifically in detail. And there are 6 general practices of the Kanban method. The first of which is visualize. We visualize to show how work is progressing, to show what work is still to do, to show what problems exist. And you can see on the slide a simple example of a Kanban board with 4 columns: ready, build, test, deploy. So the first thing to say is the first column, ready, might be a little counterintuitive. The items in the ready column are products that are ready to be built. That is, in PRINCE2 terms, they have a completed, signed off product description. So they're ready for the development team to work on. The next 2 columns show the products that are being built in the build column and being tested in the test column. And you can see at the top there's a number next to build and test, and they define the work in progress limits. And we also have a way of showing when products are blocked from further progress. And that will typically be if they have an internal or external dependency upon which they are waiting. The 4th column, deploy, is split into ready and done. And really the difference between those would typically be that ready is ready from the development team's point of view. Done is it's actually implemented and being used. But remember, we should have a common agreed definition of done. This is just an example of a Kanban board on the slide. Typically in an office environment, the Kanban board would be created on a whiteboard in a prominent place that can be easily viewed by the majority of the development team. as per the graphic, the products would be represented by yellow post-it notes that can be moved from one column to the next as the product moves through the development cycle. Different coloured post-it notes can represent different types of products. It can also be broken down by horizontal swim lanes. So on an IT type project, you might want to break it down by hardware, infrastructure, software, networks, or you might break it down by different areas of application. If you were developing, say, an ERP system, you might have a swim lane for finance and a swim lane for operations and a swim lane for HR, for instance. One word of warning, you don't want to overcomplicate it, because then you lose its power, which is to be able to look at it and get a very quick overview of the current situation of the project. The second general practice of the Kanban method is to limit work in progress. Limiting work in progress may seem a little counterintuitive at first, but if you think about a motorway, if there are a few cars on the motorway, they can all travel at the speed limit, whatever that might be in where you live. As the motorway traffic builds up and more cars come onto the motorway, you reach a point where the cars begin to slow down. They can't travel at the speed limit or their optimum speed because of the weight of traffic. One of the techniques governments use to try to maintain traffic flow is limiting the number of cars that can join the motorway, or limiting the speed at which cars can join the motorway using traffic lights. So on a slip road onto the motorway, you might have a traffic light that's on red that limits the flow of traffic, and then it'll go green and two cars can join, and then it'll go back to being red. It'll wait a moment and then let two more cars on. So it'll limit the flow of traffic on. So it's effectively limiting the work in progress on the motorway to try to maintain that traffic flow. And that's the basic idea behind the limited work in progress in the Kanban method. Is we don't want to swamp the development team with more work than they're capable of delivering. And as you can see on the slide, it says work in progress limits underpin the pull system. And the idea is that the development team pulls work to them, so they only take work on that they think they can deliver within the period of time allocated. And it also says it pulls work when capacity exists. So if you had a development team, say 6 developers, one of them becomes free, they can pull the next piece of work, assuming they have the skills and knowledge to complete that piece of work. But they'll pull the next piece that they're able to complete, rather than allocating pieces of work to developers at the beginning and maybe unintentionally overloading a particular developer. It reduces the impact of task switching and multitasking, enabling developers to focus on one thing at a time, improving their efficiency and efficacy. The next general practice is manage the flow. The team constantly looks at ways to maximize the flow. So this is very similar to PRINCE2 lessons learned, to Scrum, to a Scrum retrospective. It's the team looking at how they're working and seeking to improve the way they're working, and to remove waste as quickly as possible to manage the flow. So the whole team's responsible for the flow and making the flow as efficient as possible. And the Kanban board helps with transparency, so everyone on the team can see how the products are flowing through the process. So it might be, particularly if we were using swim lanes, we might identify that a particular type of development was moving more slowly through the process. It might be because we've only got one developer who is capable of doing that type of development. And that might indicate to us that we either need to train the other developers or bring on to the team additional developers with the required skill and knowledge. The fourth practice is making policies explicit. Boundaries need to be clearly defined about how the team works, and those policies should evolve over time. So again, lessons learned, continual improvement. The fifth general practice is implement feedback loops. And again, very similar, lessons learned, continual improvement. Ultimately, value being delivered is judged by the final consumer, the end customer. Quantitatively assessing this will directly affect what will subsequently be delivered. So in PRINCE2 Agile, the feedback might come directly from the customer, it might come by the product owner, but it's important that we get the feedback so we can improve future deliveries. And the sixth and final practice is improve collaboratively, evolve experimentally. So the method builds on collaboration through experimental improvement, and it refers to the scientific method. Other agile methods may refer to a spike or a prototype. Effectively, what it's suggesting is we have our way of doing things, we've reviewed that and maybe come up with an idea to do things better. We need to try out both in parallel and then assess which is best based on data, not based on gut feel. So again, as with Scrum, it's very much a scientific based method that you make any changes, any actions you take are based on facts, not assumptions or feelings or prejudices. We're looking for cold, hard facts, data. So it's very much based on the scientific method. And finally, process improvement is everyone's business every day. So everyone on the team should be trying to improve the team and trying to improve processes and procedures every day. And again, that is entirely in line with the PRINCE2 lessons learned philosophy. So we've talked about Scrum, we've talked about Kanban. We should mention Scrumban, which is the application of Kanban where the underlying process is based on Scrum. So you need to be careful that you get the best of both worlds, not the worst of both worlds. But essentially, we're looking at using Kanban within Scrum and in simple terms using the Kanban board within a sprint to manage the sprint backlog through the sprint. We could also use the board to show the product backlog through the whole development process.